Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the president of MassMEDIC, and welcome to our supplier showcase for September of 2021. This is a quarterly program we do to highlight the folks who make and build the medical devices and the medical technologies that we get a chance to interact with as your trade association and with the executives of this industry. So we're excited to focus on these programs. Just going to pull up a quick slide here to introduce our program a little bit. Supplier Showcase is an insider discussions forum sponsored by our friends at Thermo Fisher Scientific and QAD. They are our series sponsors, as well as our individual sponsors, Weedman, and of course, the sponsor of today's program, SteriPak. SteriPak is a global manufacturer and supply chain expert with facilities in the EU, APAC, and the US. Its global reach expands to more than 50 countries. SteriPak is 100% focused on contract manufacturing services for the medical devices and pharmaceutical packaging industries. Their mission from the outset has been clear to be the #1 pain reliever for the world's largest OEM and pharmaceutical companies. I'm excited to welcome today Eric Lindy. He is the site director for SteriPak's Lakeland facility. And we'll also be welcoming Eric Bedarian, who's the director of engineering for SteriPak. SteriPak has a very interesting and unique story about how they pivoted during COVID, and then it's going to also give us a peek into how the global supply chain is impacting medtech today. In addition, following our discussion, we'll be welcoming Andrea Clark. She's the Senior Director for Sustainability at Smith & Nephew, and Declan Reagan. He's the Senior Director for Supply Chain at Lantheus Medical Imaging. Both Declan and Andrea will be giving us a reverse pitch on how their companies are looking at supply chain, how they interact with providers of suppliers, and give us that insider's view on how the heads of purchasing and supply are looking at this industry. And I'm excited for Andrea's presentation as well, because we'll get a good look at sort of how sustainability is impacting Smith & Nephew's procurement policies here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to kind of jump into this conversation with Eric. So Eric, in early 2020, I'm guessing around March of 2020, SteriPak was approached by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because there was a global shortage, fast approaching of the swab market in terms of which is required with COVID-19. You know, I think we're all intimately familiar with the nasal swab, but suddenly it becomes one of the most important products in the world. And I'm curious, from your perspective, can you take me through those days? I'm assuming this was in February or March of 2020. You guys are seeing this global growth of a pandemic in China and the EU, and what's that opportunity look like when that foundation approaches you, and what's sort of your thought process as basically the people who are going to have this put upon them to fulfill these orders?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so you're right. Back in March of 2020, we fortunately got introduced to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And their foundation, as most of us probably know, they do support, globally in terms of medical health and trying to get things across to underfunded nations and things of that sort. So when they did approach us, when the pandemic, as it initiated within within China and started to expand through the EU and come into the US, we were asked if we applied for a grant with them to go into a joint venture of manufacturing these sterile nasal swabs to support the pandemic. As that came about, it very quickly turned into how fast can we get a validation process done? How fast can we get these nasal swabs to market? And how safely can we make it happen within our facility with, incorporating additional resources, additional machinery, supply chain. So all of that happened very quickly with a small core team within SteriPack USA. And I'll just kind of say it, you know, the way that it really was ran and was made a success, we handpicked a few people out of SteriPack USA to drive us through the program. So between landing, you know, around $1 million worth of equipment, validating a process and getting it to market, we actually did that in about 3 months. We kind of laugh as we look back now. We did our prototyping of this product. We sent one of our sales reps out to Costco, and he bought about $50 worth of Q-tips, and we put them across one of our machines in the facility, and that's where it all started. We decided, look, we have the capability, we have the tooling, we have the equipment, we can do this. So that's where it all started, was with some Q-tips from Costco put on an Amex card. And we started landing equipment in April, May timeframe. We were right around 49 employees in our facility. We actually very quickly grew into about 302 employees running a 24/7 operation. And we were supporting about 5 million swabs a week through the facility, through sterilization and shipping out to our customers. And with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, since, you know, we were on a global platform, that then obviously turned to not only an FDA requirement, but CE markings. So a lot of this validation and regulatory impacts were being handled in parallel as we were running millions of units to try to get prepared for our initial launch. So we did take on a large amount of risk, running at risk and spending the money through sterilization and supply chain. But again, as it all came, the final report started to come back. We launched originally with a 6-month shelf life for this product. And then in parallel, we moved into a 1-year shelf life and then a 2-year shelf life. And we're actually, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be launching a 3-year shelf life on our sterile swabs. So again, it's been kind of a risk versus reward proposition, trying to keep up with the market demand and support the COVID response. But it's been a roller coaster, and it's been challenging at the least in terms of the resources required, the supply chain requirements. And all of this has obviously been heavily impacted with the COVID virus impacting supply chain. Trying to get the raw materials in has been challenging as well, where we try to support the demand.
Yeah, so you're facing basically 3 challenges at once. First, you have the challenge of the pandemic and the challenge that, you have a scared and urgent population that needs this product quickly, and I'm sure none of you are sort of immune to that as human beings. And you have the workforce and resource challenge, and then number 3, you have sort of the product development challenge. And then obviously along that lines goes testing, validation, regulatory, and then finally supply chain. But what of those 3 buckets do you think, from your perspective, was the most difficult? Was it managing your workforce, hiring your workforce, or managing that sort of product development?
From the initial launch, the infrastructure and the workforce was hands down the hardest part. When you go from a 40-person, 50-person facility that's running 1 shift 5 days a week, maybe a skeleton crew on 2nd shift, to a 24/7 operation, you just don't have the leadership bench to help manage a growth into that quickly. So very, very quickly we identified, who's going to be our key players, where can we move people into some key positions. But once we started running the swabs and we got past the initial shock of establishing the resources, we probably transitioned through, we used a lot of contract labor during this time. I believe we went through about 500 associates to land on the 220 contract associates that we retained. So a lot of work through our HR department, a lot of work through our operational department to, keep the best and work through the conversations of people that didn't work out. But as the pandemic, let's say, came out of the infant stages and moved into where we are today, hands down, the hardest aspect today is the supply chain and the raw materials to support the market demand.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into that, but I'm curious in terms of you're saying you're producing about 90 million swabs a month right now, and you're producing 1 million in May of 2020, so about you say 1 million a week, so that's about 4 million a month. I can't imagine that the demand was steady and consistent. So how did you guys deal with that? I mean, I know in Massachusetts we had a lot of manufacturers pivot to create PPE and a bunch of other equipment in the spring of 21 were left kind of scratching their head saying it's awfully quiet in here.
Yeah, so we did have a large impact due to that as well. I don't want to say we flooded the market, but we did. I mean, there was other manufacturers of swabs, obviously, but the market, filled their warehouses and did what they needed to do. And they were pulling millions from us a week. And then there was a slowdown. And during that time, we did start looking at how do we reduce our labor? How do we become more cost competitive? So during that year, we actually went through a very large scale scoped project to fully automate as much as we could across our swab manufacturing. So knowing that the manual resources, the people resources were difficult to manage, one being because of COVID, people getting sick and the social distancing and just the nature of how these are manufactured. People are in close proximity when they're handling the swabs, when they're running them across the equipment. So we did work through a very significant automation process, an automation project that we've fully implemented now. So we've landed from again, needing, let's say 300 people across the 24/7 operation to where now we can almost support the same demand on 2 shifts with the same amount of equipment with, a probably 20% of that number. So we've landed at about 100 people in the facility. But there was an absolute lull that you had mentioned, and we went through a significant reduction in force. At that time, we also landed multi-millions of dollars worth of automation on the equipment. And we all stood back and said, geez, we've got these really great looking paperweights in our clean room. And what do we do now? So, during this time, again, it didn't change our diagnostic approach. Globally, we did continue to look at the polyester swabs. We had people reaching out to us with injection molding flock swabs. We've got foam swabs on the docket. So we've also got saliva collection tubes that companies were putting to market as well, because the let's call it the invasiveness of the swab that was uncomfortable for people. The saliva collection became more of a market demand as well. So as we got into this lull on the polyester side of the swab, of the collection swab, we did see a lot of other portions of the market kind of pivoting into saliva collection, flock swabs, foam swabs. So there was a small portion of the business that continued, but we certainly did see a lull early in 21 before the Delta variant became such an issue. So we did have a reduction in force. We had millions of dollars of equipment on the floor waiting for the next steps. But again, here we are now over the past couple of weeks, let's call it the past month, where the market has now seen an uptick in demand because of the Delta variant. So we're back to running our automated equipment. We've brought in some temporary labor again to help support some of this. So the business is starting to, unfortunately, as we support this pandemic, I mean, the business is starting to ramp up again.
Yeah, I can't imagine that was an easy, we talked about it a little bit in the call the other day, just, this sort of, in 2020, there was the jump in and all hands on deck, boat is, taking on water, get a bucket. Oh, and at what point as a business do you guys have to decide whether it's 100% in or 100% out? I can't imagine an area that you can be half in, half out.
Yeah, it's kind of like jumping out of an airplane, right? The chute's going to open or it's not.
Yeah.
so so you know it really, there was a critical point in the business where we decided that, look, we're going to dedicate ourselves to this business. SteriPack, during this time, as we grew, we also had to kind of do some dynamic changes. As a global company, we still, on a smaller scale, operated very independently at the site level. We were competitive between SteriPack USA, SteriPack Poland, SteriPack Malaysia, Ireland. But as this pandemic became global and we started supporting each other through the facilities, we then made a very dynamic shift within our business to look at ourselves more as a global unit versus a specific region on the globe. So that's where really things shifted for us, where we then decided to take our sales force, some of our program managers, and we developed that into divisions. So now we added a diagnostic division during this time. We have a pharmaceutical division, a design division, and then a med device division. So specific to the diagnostic division, that was something that did grow out of the pandemic. And again, when we talk about being all in, the resources and the operational dollars that goes to something like that are just absolutely significant. So again, it kind of brings you down to, when things hit that lull of, geez, do we have a diagnostic division that we can support? We really had to, as you discussed, people pivoting into, different types of PPE and different types of aspects. We had to do the same as we grew our diagnostic division, really based on the foundation of swabs and saliva collection. We also had to start looking at women's healthcare, animal healthcare, all types of diagnostic attributes that we could go after in the market. Because look, as we all hope, I'm sure, is that this COVID thing is not going to last forever. So as we, get past this portion of our journey, we still need to support the business on the diagnostic side. So we did have that, again, that all-in approach, where it probably, let's call it about a year ago, where we decided, look, we're going to go into a global platform as a, one company, one face type of business. And we're going to design ourselves as a global competitor with our established divisions. And that's really where it all kind of took shape. That's where it all got established into, we're all in, there's no turning back now. We've established the foundation, the players, the leadership to move into these 4 divisions. And that's where we're at today.
That's great. It's fascinating. So just, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask a question, we do have the Q&A tab here on your screen. You can just enter a question in. I'm happy to pass it along to Eric. I'm curious in terms of, just, in terms of this is much different business than what you're normally in. Is it not? I can't imagine you guys were nasal swab experts. How much different is this than the normal course of business previous to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I think a lot of us at SteriPack have learned more about swab not only manufacturing, but the different lengths of swabs and how far swabs can go into the nasal cavity, and what's it mean to do pooling versus individual testing. So there's been a very quick knowledge base that we all had to absorb and get through. But yeah, so as a contract manufacturer, typically we're not dealing in any type of commodities or high volume type of manufacturing. So it's a lot more of the, let's say, high cost, low volume type of things. So with that, the medical manufacturing side of the business was really 100% of the business, before we got into our division platform. So the med device side does a lot more of the cleaning, assembly, and packaging and sterilization of devices. A lot of it gets utilized within the compression wound arena, the cancer type of divisions. So a lot of devices that we manufactured prior to this swab manufacturing were very discreet, very, again, I say low volume in terms of hundreds a month versus millions a month.
Yeah.
So yeah, a very different capacity, a very different production model, all across the board for sure.
So we have a question that just came in. How did you leverage your global manufacturing network to help fulfill demand for sterile swab products? What operations or level of capacity investments were made in the global network?
So we manufacture these swabs across, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with a form fill seal machine, but form fill seal machines in essence have tooling that create a cavity. You lay the product in the cavity, and in line it can then seal it, print it, cut it to whatever packaging size you have, and then it gets put into packaging for sterilization. So the SteriPack is an Ireland-based company. We're headquartered out of Ireland, and so a lot of the equipment that we use globally is out of the European market. So we did have a much larger manufacturing base in our Poland facility, where they had a lot of this capability already. But again, the speed to market was the let's say the hardest transition. So as we started purchasing machines out of our European market, there was times where it was, an 8-month lead time or a 12-month lead time for a machine that we needed in 2 or 3 months. So we leveraged our global platform in terms of, look, we're going to buy 10 machines this year. We're going to put 4 in Poland, 4 in the US, 2 in Malaysia. We also started, the companies that we were working with were, again, they were also all hands in terms of supporting this pandemic. So they started reaching out to some of their food grade manufacturers, some of the folks that were utilizing the same equipment, whether it be on food grade or an industrial type of platform, to shift that machine over to the medical side so they can make some upgrades within their equipment to sell off to the medical side. There was also some companies that assisted us in terms of, again, the equipment and speed to market that we had recognized within the European market, that refurbished equipment. So the refurbished equipment could get us to market quicker because that platform took maybe 12 weeks to get a piece of equipment versus 12 months. And again, we had some of the manufacturing capability in our Poland site already, some of the manufacturing capability in our Malaysian site, but the US site was actually the last site to be purchased and developed within SteriPack. So we still had a much smaller manufacturing platform. So we did leverage a lot of the knowledge out of our Poland and Malaysian facilities to transition here in the US. And again, the validations, the packaging. We have laboratory facilities within our Polish site. So instead of doing a lot of third-party laboratories here in the US, we could get testing done much quicker within our Polish facilities. So we would expedite all of our testing through Poland. So again, everything at this point in the pandemic, it was, again, a lot of the emergency use type of the emergency use authorizations, even support through the Bill and Melinda Gates. We were getting letters from them to send to presidents and CEOs of some of the equipment companies to say, hey, look, SteriPack is working with us on this global pandemic. So we did leverage our, I'm going to call it our local business community, meaning our Poland, Malaysia facilities, because they had some experience with the form, fill, seal capabilities much greater than what the US had. But at the same time, we leveraged the global platform of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the global platform of the company is called Multivac that we use for form, fill, seals. So that was a great attribute in terms of a business partnership. It was huge to see the companies come together and make this happen as quickly as it did.
I'm curious, what is the regulatory pathway for a nasal swab for use in a diagnostic? I mean, is it, and it's, I assume it's still under EUA, or is that?
So it is under EU, but it's considered a class 1 exempt. So the regulatory path is not as rigorous as what you would have for, you know, class 1, class 2, class 3, if you will. Being a class 1 exempt product, it is let's say a little bit easier to get to market. But again, under the emergency use authorizations, we were definitely fast-tracked through a lot of our FDA submissions. The CE markings that we submitted through our ISO platform were also fast-tracked. So the CE submissions, the FDA submissions, we were turning those around anywhere from 14 to 21 days, where typically it could take up to 6 months on a regular regulatory type of path. So the emergency use authorizations were a big aspect of this, and how they were fast-tracked through the FDA submissions for sure.
Yeah. So let's turn to the other bucket of challenges, which you've already sort of teased out, which is, you know, what is the global supply chain in terms of the raw product needed to create these swabs? And is it like every other aspect of the supply chain right now, you know, lagging behind?
Yeah, so again, from an equipment standpoint, you know, let me step back one. So manufacturing of the swab is really 3 major components, which is the swab itself, the bottom web, which is the clear packaging portion, and the top web, which is the paper portion that gets printed on. As I think most of us in the medical industry that deal with packaging, whether it be from Oliver or J&J or, you know, any DuPont materials, we've probably recognized a significant supply chain issue with anything that's manufactured out of resin, out of a plastic resin, whether it be extruded or injection molded. So one of the largest impacts to date right now would be the extruded material that we use for our packaging. It went from probably a 4-month lead time a year ago, a year and a half ago, to now we've got probably an 8 to 10 month lead time. And we have some suppliers that aren't even giving us commitment dates because they can't get supply from their raw material suppliers. And to further that, as we continue to try to develop our processing and automate our business here to support this, you know, you do start running into, can we get the microchips? Can we get the processors? We have machinery right now being built out of Italy, and we're having a really difficult time finding some of the processors, finding some of the equipment, the devices that we need internally for the machines. And again, this isn't because of, you know, let's say a mine shut down or a chip manufacturer shut down. It's a matter of resources. I mean, you've got, you know, people that are sick, you've got people that are out of work, you've got companies that are trying to support the global health by reducing their workforces so they don't have so many people in the manufacturing facility. So that's really where the shortfall is coming from, is just the resource availability to increase the capacity versus the demand.
So yeah, I mean, we talked about this, the resin, and you know, where's the global hubs for these resins that are used so predominantly in med tech. I mean, I can't think of many other things that are not. I mean, isn't that sort of the baseline material for almost every medical
Almost
device?
everything. I mean, everything within the surgical arena, everything within the packaging arena, really comes out of a poly resin, right? So, you know, for us in SteriPack, we do a significant amount of business out of the Asian Pacific market, Japan and China, for resin, in terms of a raw material being resin, and also out of you know, Germany and the Central European market. We do a lot of raw material out of there as well. So and again, I think we might have talked a little bit about this previously, but it's come to the point now where the impact has been not only great on us as an end user for the raw material, but our suppliers have actually started to reach out to us to assist in paying for their supply chain and expedites and things like that. So it's starting to trickle down to a much broader scope of even our suppliers for the manufactured portion of the business are asking us to support them on the cost side of helping expedite, you know, whether it's a pellet or a reel of plastic, whatever the case may be, to support their manufacturing process. So everyone, again, fortunately or unfortunately, to support this pandemic, is trying to spread the pain of how do we make this work across our entire platform. So it's becoming really challenging, and we're not trying to, you know, I say we're not trying to make a buck out of this, but we need to be cost competitive in the market. So as we start expediting materials and expediting raw materials, we have to absorb that cost operationally in the facility, which has then pushed us to try to automate and do different things operationally to support that. You know, because you can't have a swab go to market that costs $10 just because you're expediting, you know, millions of pounds of things that are coming across the ocean.
Yeah. What are the things, I mean, there are any things you can do to mitigate that? I mean, stockpiling, I mean, is it a matter, you know, you're saying so the resin suppliers they're doing their best to sort of triage, I would guess, you know, is it a matter of sort of, you know, biggest order wins on some of this stuff? Or
yeah, a lot of that is the case. And look, although SteriPack is a global company and we work with dozens and dozens of the large OEMs, SteriPack as a standalone entity is relatively infant compared to some of the bigger players in the market. You know, SteriPack calling a DuPont to say, hey, look, you're running me short and I need to manufacture more, is much different than let's say a J&J or a Philips or a Medtronic calling up somebody and say, hey, you're running me short. So a lot of times we have had some pushback here in the very recent past, where we've actually had suppliers tell us, look, if your orders aren't going to increase to $500,000 versus $100,000, you know, we can't support your business, you know, for the near future until something changes. Because again, I mean, everyone is trying to allocate to the right places, but with allocation, you know, some of the smaller orders just aren't being put in their production line.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is that a matter of the cost of business in total has gone up because of the employee shortage? Or
without a doubt. So and not just because of the employee shortage, but the cost of business from a raw material cost, from an operational cost, you know, you still have to turn the lights on, whether it's for 10 people or for 100 people. So the cost per square foot in these facilities is increasing, and, you know, the raw materials are increasing. So the entire supply chain and operational aspect have increased. And with that, everyone's trying to optimize what they can from start to finish.
Yeah, so so you're facing in terms of and now the equipment that you have, that the automation equipment. I mean, I assume that you've got all that in hand, but I mean, you're probably facing issues on that end as well, I would imagine too, in terms of any sort of I mean, is it servicing and new equipment, or is it are there backups there too, or
For the most part, I mean, there is a, what we call an infant mortality rate in terms of the equipment, right? But for the most part, when this equipment does get landed, we try to write things up accordingly to where it's, 99.9% efficient, and, it's going to run for X amount of time. And we do supply ourselves with the critical components, the critical spare components as we purchase this equipment. So we definitely try to, mitigate any risks associated with that as we bring the material in, or bring the equipment in. So we try to mitigate the risk as best as we can, but like most things, for anyone that's running a large amount of equipment, it's typically a 30-cent gasket or a $5 air valve that shuts you down versus the $100,000 PLC or something of that sort. So we've been really fortunate with the equipment that we've landed. We're really fortunate with the partners that we have, designing and developing our automation for us, and the support that we get around that has been pretty significant. I mean, every time we land this equipment, we've had technicians from Italy, from Germany. We write them up letters of authorization to travel to the US. We get it approved through our proper regulatory channels. So we try to stretch out and do everything that we can to get as much support as we can to make this work.
yeah, it's a unbelievable logistics challenge. I mean, was this much logistics always part of your purview, or is this are you learning on the fly as well?
I got to tell you, it's I think we're learning on the fly as well. Some people might not want to admit too much to that. But look, we've grown significantly as a SteriPack family, not just in the US, but across the globe, during this pandemic. I mean, even down to things that you wouldn't think are very trivial, but as we started to manufacture swabs, we actually started, for the most part, again, we were very regionalized. And SteriPack USA was designed to support the Americas, and SteriPack Poland was designed to support the European market, and Malaysia for the Asia Pacific market. But then as SteriPack USA started shipping product over to Taiwan and these places that we've never shipped to before, it was, well, how do we do that? How do we ship to Asia? What do you mean they're rejecting it? What do you mean it's, so it became a challenge in that sense too. I mean, again, the learning curve had to be very short. But yeah, we definitely, there was a lot of learning on the fly in terms of, again, just getting something. We've always kind of prized ourselves on being very nimble and able to get speed to market. And that was kind of our win, not just for us, but for the folks that we were manufacturing for. But that speed to market in a, I guess, a business that we weren't 100% familiar with in the first place, was certainly something that we had to get our arms and heads wrapped around very quickly.
Yeah, so you guys are global supply chain experts. So any, prognostications as to how, I mean, like, it's just, I just saw a report that came out the other day, medtech supply chain issues are going to continue to last, for a while. I mean, we've heard some pretty frightening prognostications, maybe up until 23, 24, even with a hangover. I mean, these problems don't resolve themselves quick. Anything that you're hearing, about how we get out of this?
We're kind of in the same position, right? I was going to say the same boat, but it would have been a terrible pun, because we've got things sitting at port, We've got boats that have been sitting with raw materials for a month, out like at the Long Beach port in California. And these are materials that were planned for production 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it is a very challenging position, and look, the ports are being overwhelmed because, you know, the customs folks, again, they're understaffed because of things that are happening with the COVID response. So customs isn't processing things as fast. The dock workers and the ports are understaffed, so the boats are being anchored. So the ports are being overrun with ships that are anchored out at sea at the moment. So right now it's a very large queue of trying to get things, you know, into port, onto the trucks. Again, everything within the supply chain is not only being backed up because of the shortages of raw materials, but also, you know, the shortages of dock crews and trucking companies, and, you know, getting things from California over to Florida. It's a significant impact, and the best that we can do as a business is to try to manage that with extending our lead times. Again, it's risk versus reward, right? You know, we used to put POs out 6 months and say, look, let's tie up that much cash. That's the best we can do. Now we have to tie up, you know, 12 to 18 months, you know, worth of cash that we commit to a PO on these raw materials. Because that's the only way that we can get into production and fill the supply chain across the 18-month lead time that some of our materials currently have.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. So in essence, it's not a raw materials issue. It's a human capital issue.
A lot of it. It's again, I mean, everyone is being challenged with the amount of people that they can either safely hire within their industry, or the amount of people that they can keep healthy within their industry. You know, and right now and I hate saying this out loud, but even from a political standpoint, where, you know, people that are being considered the, you know, government contractors versus non-government contractors, private industry that is supporting government contracts. You know, there's a lot of things that are coming down through the administration here recently that are mandating, you know, people getting vaccinated. And what do you do with the people that are just adamant about not being vaccinated? You know, here locally in Florida, effective, you know, next week, in essence, you know, we have people that will be losing through the state of Florida because they're not vaccinated. You know, so that's another challenge that's going to be coming very quickly, you know, through the US market, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an endlessly fascinating question here, and somewhat scary in a lot of ways, frankly.
It is. It really is. And it's, you know, you can take it day by day, but from a, you know, that's a very tactical approach. But you have to be, you know, the strategic approach now, you know, that you could, you know, maybe look at 12 months for the short term of your business. I mean, that short-term strategy has now stretched probably 18 to 24 to make sure that your business is going to be successful with the way that the market is today.
Yeah, so you were just saying that, you know, product that you expected in 2 weeks ago is still sitting in Long Beach, out in the ocean in one of those big queues, right? That, I mean, I'm curious as to, you know, if in real days, I mean, how long does that set you back when you're looking at something like that?
Unfortunately, they can give you lead times the best they can, but without a doubt, it's at least, before it'll get to port, will be another 4 to 6 weeks for sure. And then you got probably a week transit from California to the US. So what a lot of folks are doing, I know what we're doing as a supply chain company, it's a little bit safer, although it's exponentially more expensive to put things in air freight right now, because you can land them here in Florida. So we're breaking down shipment sizes, which again increases your piece price. And to air freight it obviously is, again, much more expensive, but we can land them in Tampa, in Orlando, in Miami, and we can kind of I guess, manage our own destiny, but the cost of that is just significant. So we have to be very careful on what's the necessity and demand there.
And again, the Delta spike that we're having or had for the past 6 weeks, I mean, I can just from going into the store wanting to buy a rapid COVID test, I can tell we're not keeping up with that demand. Is this going to be a case where as the Delta peak comes down, we're going to suddenly be flooded with all these tests that we need, and we're going to kind of
I can tell you from us, specifically here in the US, without maybe divulging too much, if you will, but we have 2 very large companies that we're working with that do in-home health tests, and they've asked us to put a product to market for them in 4 weeks or less, which we're working on very diligently at the moment to do that. So we're trying to stay ahead of it. We are allocating resources the best we can. We're, again, the risk versus reward. We are not afraid as a company to say, hey, look, we need to hire some more people to make this happen. And then we have to kind of wash that out on the back end. But I do think over the past 2 weeks, I mean, we've went from, let's call it a 0 swab demand to a 30 million unit demand that people want, by the middle of October. So in 6 weeks, people have ordered 30 million units, based on what they're seeing the market do. And on top of that, 2 to 3 significant in-home projects, in-home testing projects that we've been asked to try to expedite to market in the next 4 weeks.
Wow. I can't imagine how you do business like that, frankly. That's a 0 to 300 million. Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's a challenge, and we talk about it every day. We do, because it's, look, from a sales perspective, it's their job to get the orders and to get the customers and respond to them. And from an operational perspective, it's our job to make it happen and execute, right? But there's only so many hours in the day. And you, again, I admitted, I look at myself in this camera right now and I think to myself, man, you look tired.
I think it's a great background.
Yeah. So, but look, this is, if nothing else, SteriPack Global has done everything 110% to try to support this pandemic. And even after the pandemic, we're going to do everything 110% to support, what we can from the med device and everything else. So, so it's not going to stop. I mean, and again, and that's our business model. Our business model is to, like you had mentioned, our mission is to take the pain away from a supply chain and manufacturing perspective. And to do that, we have to be nimble, we have to be quick to market, and we have to execute and make things happen for people.
Yeah, that's great. And, I just want to say thank you for what you guys are doing. I mean, you guys do that. That means we can test our families at home. We can try to stop this thing. So I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. There did come in a question that I think, we might be able to close with here, which is, where is product development located now that you're operating as a global entity, and what's the best way for suppliers to work with those teams? So a little reverse pitch for you.
Sure. So we kind of go down 2 paths. So as SteriPack has grown over the past couple of years, we've actually had some mergers and acquisitions that have happened as well. So SteriPack now has a design house, which is located in New Jersey. And that's part of our design division. So anything that is, let's say, when I say new product development, I mean very, very infant in terms of stages for clinicals and any type of human healthcare response and things like that. We do have a design house that SteriPack can now offer to its customers. If it's a tech transfer, we handle that in-house with our own project teams that each site has. So anything that is a tech transfer that a company may already have in market, but they either need additional capacity or want to transfer it because they've got other things going on, we handle that new product development in-house at the local manufacturing sites and we deal with the customer directly at the site level.
Great. Eric, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to let you get back to the task at hand and getting those 300 million swabs created. But again, I just want to thank you not only as president of MassMEDIC, where you are a member, but and the supporter of this program, but I want to thank you and your team for everything you've done to help keep us safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you so much. You guys have a great day.
You too. So ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to move to the reverse pitch portion of our program. And this is really, I think, one of the most exciting parts of the Supplier Showcase. It's a chance for our OEM partners and members to talk about how they view supply chain procurement and give a little pitch to you guys about how you can work with them better. First up, I have Andrea Clark. She's the Senior Director of Sustainability at Smith & Nephew. They're a terrific member of ours. How you doing, Andrea?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to you. Do you need to share a screen or anything, or are you going to go talk a little bit about your mission? And then if you guys have questions, shoot them into the Q&A tab and I can MC those.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. Smith & Nephew is a medtech firm. We have different divisions, including orthopedics, trauma and extremities, sports med, and our wound division. So we've got a lot of different product offerings out there. And our mission is, life unlimited. We are working closely with the surgeons and healthcare professionals in order to provide the best outcome for the patients. So from our perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our sustainability requirements when we're onboarding new suppliers or when we have legacy suppliers that we're working with. So initially, all suppliers are screened for labor standards risk. So we can sit here and say, well, we're a US company, so we don't have labor standards risks, but we do. And we also look at when we're risk mapping our supply chain, all of our new suppliers at onboarding answer questions around labor standards risks. And that includes, employment being freely chosen, child labor laws, discrimination, freedom of association. So, those types of questions. And then with our legacy suppliers, we are looking at geography and commodity and spend to determine whether or not we need to do some additional due diligence with those suppliers to ensure that we don't have any labor standards issues, particularly further down the supply chain. And then we also have a sustainability and health and safety review that happens after onboarding, and with all of our suppliers, all of our tier one. So from that perspective, we're looking at policies to protect health and minimize environmental impacts. We're looking at applicable regulations, which could be, REACH or Prop 65 or RoHS. We're asking about injury rates, and we do have suppliers ask why we care about that. But it's been our experience that when your injury rates go up and you don't have a healthy and safe working environment, then your quality tends to go down. So they are related. And then we're also looking at carbon tracking and reduction efforts. So we have recently updated our carbon reduction target to a net zero target from an 80% reduction, in line with the Paris Agreement, and the understanding that climate change impacts health. And as a healthcare company, it is incumbent upon us to do our part to reduce our carbon emissions and to ensure that we are, again, doing what we can to limit temperature rise. So that assessment, again, is based on commodity and spend and geography. And we then have a program in place where our management system goes through those responses. We go back to suppliers and ask for additional information if needed. And our due diligence is done through our procurement CSR group, so corporate social responsibility group within procurement. And then if we have concerns, we will raise a corrective action request, and we will track that and work with the supplier to mitigate any risks that have been identified. If we can't mitigate risks, then we can move to an on-site social audit to see where the concerns are. And then we can also terminate the relationship with the supplier, but that is not our first choice. We much prefer to have suppliers who are willing to work with us and to implement policies and procedures to make us all better and ensure that we're addressing concerns. So with that, we do have a code of conduct, as I think all medical companies do. We do ask our suppliers to sign up to our code or have an equivalent or more restrictive code, right? But we also have, and it's on our website, a third-party guide for suppliers who are working with us. So if you go to smithnephew.com, you will see in our compliance section both our code of conduct and the third-party guide. So that provides a little more information about how to meet our expectations and things that you can do to proactively address any concerns that if you read through that and are not yet one of our suppliers, that's a great place to go and say, okay, here's our code, here's what we expect, and here are ways you can meet what we're trying to do. We also have on the compliance site under our policies, there is a sustainability and corporate social responsibility policy that is directly related to suppliers. So it's all out there. It's pretty clear what we're looking to do. And I think the labor standards section is more embedded in our processes. We started that about 3 years ago with assessing our tier 1 suppliers. Those are those that we have the direct relationship with, right? So we are now pushing our suppliers to embed that process with their tier 1 suppliers. So if we have, in particular, a smaller supplier that doesn't know how to do that, then we will provide support on what you can do with your suppliers to ensure that there are not labor standards risks. That will continue through the supply chain. We have this year, we are finishing the assessment of our tier 1 suppliers. We have about 30,000 tier 1 suppliers. So big group. Wow. Big group there. And then obviously, that number goes up exponentially in the lower tiers. So that's part of why we're saying to our suppliers, we need your help. We want to ensure that we are doing business with people that share our values, and that you as our suppliers should also be working on that with your direct suppliers. On the sustainability side, that is a newer process. We've been doing that for about just over a year. And with a lot of those, our suppliers will be assessed on a 3-year cycle. So with sustainability, when we're asking about carbon reduction efforts, we frequently get, we don't have that in place. Okay, we understand that because it's a new path for us as well. But within the next 3 years, when we come back to you, we're expecting at that point that you will have an understanding of your carbon footprint. Both scope 1 and 2, which are obviously those emissions that are within your control, but also scope 3, which is everything else. And that's where our suppliers sit in our scope 3. So our customers are demanding that we understand and have action plans in place to reduce all 3 scopes of emissions. We have a great plan in place for scope 1 and 2. We understand what is within our control and how we can minimize those emissions. And we are working to understand what's going on in our supply base. So that's the 3-year cycle. And if you don't have it in place right now, that's okay, as long as you're working towards understanding it and reducing those emissions.
Wow, that's really impressive and quite the challenge. How big a team do you have to be able to vet 30,000 suppliers, or do you bring in a third-party service to help vet these
Well,
suppliers?
we do both. We have a small team. Within procurement, we have currently a 2-person team. We're adding a third next year. And that was why the risk mapping process was really important for us to figure out. How do we start? We can't possibly go back and ask every supplier for their employment contract, which may vary based on geography, right?
Right.
So we look at geography. What are the high-risk geographies? We use the Global Slavery Index to determine, where we need to prioritize and where our suppliers are located. Then we're looking at commodity. So also within the GSI, you can see high-risk commodities. So if you're looking at, say, cotton, which we use in our wound dressings, and it's coming from China, then we're going to do additional due diligence. If there's cotton coming from the US, then that is considered lower risk, and we will begin ratcheting down those geographies that we're looking into. But we really started with available information, what is out there with the GSI, that we can work with NGOs if we need to. How do we determine where our risks are?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. First of all, I commend all the work you guys are doing there, because I mean, clearly with like net zero carbon emissions, I mean, Smith and Nephew can be as green as they want, but you guys employ a vast constellation of suppliers and things like that. So I mean, you have to kind of carry that through all the way. How long have these? What was the genesis of this this initiative to really ensure that you have sustainability, especially on the environmental side, through your suppliers?
So we have a long history. We've been around 160 plus years. So the company is well established. We published our first sustainability report in 2000. So we're now 20 years into this. That was really focused on environment, and it's become obviously more well-rounded with ESG, and looking at what is our impact on the communities where we live and work. We have for years tracked energy, water, waste. That's been embedded into our process. There were some mitigating factors, and primarily it's one, we know it's the right thing to do, right? But that's not always a great reason to do it, because sometimes there is an expense associated with what we're doing. But it's also as our customer base matures, right? So the NHS has been a leader in this space and started several years ago with the labor standards assurance system, and pushing their suppliers to look more into supply chain. So we have participated in audits with them for the last 3 or 4 years. And then as that really became, the NHS tends to start it, and then in the US, Kaiser Permanente tends to pick it up, right?
Yeah.
So they're one of our
leaders, right?
Yes. So they're one of our larger national accounts. So when Kaiser picks it up, then other people start to kind of watch what they're doing. And then we've seen like Cardinal Health is doing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Kaiser is currently watching the NHS with their carbon reduction efforts. So we have fairly regular communications, even from my perspective. I probably talk with Kaiser at least every couple months. And we've talked about carbon reduction efforts, and they're watching what's going on in the NHS. So customers and customer demands are increasing. Many of our customers in the EU, and we're seeing it now in US national accounts and starting to see it in Japan and Australia, are demanding sustainability information prior to tenders. So unless you are providing that information and have active programs towards reducing your environmental footprint, or reducing packaging, helping the customers meet their goals, they won't even allow you to bid on tenders.
Yeah. Do you find that many of the smaller suppliers struggle to meet these demands, or is it perhaps counterintuitive? Maybe the larger ones do. I mean, where are you having the most pushback from your suppliers on some of these initiatives?
I think our pain points are more with the smaller suppliers that just don't have dedicated staff. So you have people wearing multiple hats in a smaller company, and maybe don't have the time and the full understanding of why we're asking what we're asking. And that's where it is really incumbent upon us to provide that support. So when we go to a supplier and say, you need to be looking into the labor standards risks of your immediate suppliers, and they don't know how to do that, well, then we don't just throw them to the wolves. We help them and say, okay, it's the same thing that we're asking you. You can implement something like this. Doesn't have to be exactly like that. Some of our smaller suppliers don't have an employment contract, particularly in the US, where we don't have contracts like they have in the EU. So we then start asking, are you following local law? So there's a step down, but it's for us, it's a way to say to our suppliers, we're asking this for a reason. We want to help you better your processes and procedures as well. And to say, from that perspective, this is where we're headed. So in 3 years, when we come back and reassess the risks and ask these questions, we need more information.
Yeah.
So allowing them to know what's coming and not be blindsided by something, or to say, you can't be a supplier because you don't have this information, but this is where we're headed.
Right. I suspect that anytime Smith & Nephew, it's a acquisitive company, like any large multinational company, you end up with a whole host of new suppliers. If a company is looking to be acquired by Smith & Nephew, do they have to, does it behoove them to make sure that their supply chain is in line with your standards? Because I would guess that would be added work if you have to then come in and do a whole bunch of auditing and corrective actions against their suppliers.
Yes, no one wants a whole list of corrective actions.
Yeah,
we don't, the supplier doesn't, and we try to work with our suppliers so that we're not putting in place corrective actions for the sake of corrective actions. But that's also why we put the information out there, right? Our code of conduct is there. Our guide to working with us is there for anyone to see. And it's, these requirements, both on labor standards and particularly around carbon emissions, are only going to increase. So we have the customer side of demands. We have the investor side of demands. And, we've all seen some of what's happened at Exxon, and, some of the BlackRock in particular is a very active investor in the ESG space. And I probably meet with our investor relations group and different investors, again, at least once a month, because they have additional questions. So I think the important part for us is with our suppliers, we're not asking for anything that we're not doing ourselves. That's one thing. And we're not asking for additional due diligence unless we're actioning that due diligence. So, there are times if we have a supplier that we deem as high risk, and we go back and say, we need a copy of your health and safety policy, or a copy of your, environmental commitment to minimize your footprint. And we'll get it in Mandarin. And I don't know how to read that, right? Yeah. So that's where then we're pulling in either a procurement person in country or our health, safety, and environment regional directors to interact directly with that supplier and say, this is what we're asking for and this is why. And we either can work through it or we do put a CAPA in place. And then there's a time frame. It's usually 90 days to 6 months.
So you said you had 30,000 tier one suppliers in total. I mean, do you know a number offhand, how many suppliers Smith and Nephew works with?
No, I know it's over 100,000, throughout the supply chain. I know with our tier one suppliers, we identified about 600 that we considered to be high risk. And so, we've worked through that. It's taken us a year to work through that. And then every quarter, we have an update on new suppliers who have already, input labor standards questions, but then we're going back to those new suppliers each quarter and assessing, risk mapping. So are they high risk, and where do we need additional due diligence, and working with those suppliers.
And so if you want to work with Smith and Nephew as a supplier, as a brand new supplier, I would imagine that you want to very closely look at that code of conduct and make sure that you are at least meeting the lion's share of those, if not all of those, before you begin the process of trying to sell into the company.
Yes, our initial assessment is compliance based. So we're looking at anti-bribery, anti-corruption, and all of that is detailed in our code of conduct. From the sustainability side of things, if you, again, on our main website, there's a sustainability tab, and I guess the last 3 or 4 years of our sustainability reports are there. Our conflict minerals assessments are there. So, we're able to say that we have been conflict free for the last 5 years. That is a huge amount of work that goes into that, but it's very important to us to know that, under Dodd-Frank, we can say that. That also will give a flavor of what we're doing in the communities where we live and work. Obviously, last year there was a lot on our COVID response. There's a lot of information out there where you can see what we're doing and why, and we're trying to be, more transparent as we move through. And that's one, because transparency is always a good thing, right? And two, as our legal requirements change as a British company, we have legal requirements around reporting for, carbon and TCFD. And this year we've got a much more in-depth TCFD assessment. We have an in-depth SASB assessment that, are sustainability related, TCFD in particular. Again, a huge amount of work, but trying to understand not just our impact on the environment, we're pretty clear on that one, but the environment's impact on us and where our locations are. Are we subject to sea level rise? Are we subject to, additional severe weather events? Really looking at, we're starting this year's assessment is focused on us. Next year's assessment will include some of our top suppliers and what their carbon footprint is, and how that impacts us. Will we be able, supply chain issues that you were just discussing, with Eric, we're all struggling with supply chain issues and getting what we need. So, if our supplier has a major issue and they're particularly, a single source supplier, what does that do? So
right.
Our risk assessment is stepwise. So we're starting with internal this year. Next year, we're looking at our big partner suppliers. And then it will continue to go down. So yes, if suppliers are wanting to work with us, then these are items that they need to be aware of and need to be looking into, so that we're all able to minimize risk and continue with moving forward with having a business, and being able to move forward into the future.
That's great. Andrea, would you mind hanging out for a few minutes as we get Declan queued up here from Lantheus Medical? I think some folks might want to ask some questions. Maybe they're formulating them, but I really appreciate the chance to interact with you, and thanks for all you're doing over at Smith and Nephew. Declan, you are at Lantheus Medical Imaging, another one of our great members in MassMEDIC. You're the Senior Director of Supply Chain. Lantheus is a kind of a quiet powerhouse in the Massachusetts scene. Do you need to share any slides, or are you going to do this a cappella? So to
there you go. It's going to be a cappella today. So how are you, Brian? I saw the list of participants out here. I do see some familiar names out there. So if you don't know me, my name is Declan Regan, as Brian just introduced. I work for Lantheus Medical. Lantheus is a leader in the diagnostic imaging agent. So we're helping healthcare professionals understand what's going on in folks' bodies, and then prescribing medications or procedures to help with those images that they see. So today I'm going to kind of talk relatively, I guess, from my perspective, being the procurement lead, relatively rudimentary RFP process and response. So hopefully everybody on the call will be able to take something away from what I say today, or maybe a couple of snippets as it relates to responding to RFPs and potentially kind of getting yourself, your company's foot in the door, working with potential new customers. So the first portion of the RFP process I kind of wanted to just chat through was kind of understanding the timeline. So really understanding when the dates for submission are, when your replies are required. The biggest thing for me, I think, from a procurement perspective, would be the questions portion. So really understanding when and what you're allowed to ask. From my perspective, in a supplier coming on boarding as a brand new supplier, asking questions and asking the proper questions up front leads to a lot less heartache for both myself and the new supplier coming on board. If the proper questions are asked, and I understand, and I know the suppliers understand, that responding to an RFP or providing a quote is cumbersome. There's a lot of detail that usually goes into it. There's a lot of effort that goes into working through responses. So kind of asking some key questions up front and understanding timelines as it relates to those questions is key. I would always say, always ask some form of questions. Asking some questions shows me a level of engagement from the supplier base. And if I send it out to 5 suppliers and I don't get questions from one of them, my thought process is, 1, I either wrote a fantastic RFP, or 2, they don't care too much. So I would really encourage you to ask questions proactively when given the opportunity. I'll go through some of those key questions that I kind of racked my brain through and kind of figured out, hey, these are some really good questions I got from suppliers when going through the process. So the first one I would ask, kind of coming into a new customer, is, what are the set of business criteria that's going to be used for supplier selection? So if you can understand what actually is being looked at, whether it be timing, savings, diverse supplier status, proximity to the site, travel required, all those types of things that are actually being used to select the supplier. If you can understand what those criteria are, you can really start to tailor your responses to that criteria. It shouldn't be a hidden criteria. I think understanding what's being used to select is going to be able to tailor your response significantly better. It's really understanding what's important to the folks that you're speaking with, and again, tailoring that response to those important factors. One other thing I would always, and I just put this on here as a key point, payment terms. Payment terms seems to always be an issue with every supplier we deal with. So asking that up front, understanding what the requirement is for payment terms, can usually lead to a lot less heartache on the back end when we get to negotiating a contract or an MSA agreement. The next question I would ask is, what does the supplier onboarding look like? And what is that? What timing? What kind of timing does that look like as well? A lot of times when we send out RFPs, or sometimes even earlier RFIs, or requests for information, we're trying to gauge an understanding of how capable is the supplier of performing the business need that we have. And sometimes, based on kind of the need, we do need to go out, we need to audit sites. We need to ensure that you have proper protocols in place, proper policies in place. What kind of required documents are going to be necessary for you to produce for you to be successful in your bid and your proposal. So asking what a supplier onboarding looks like, as well as the timing surrounding that supplier onboarding up front, is going to give you a better understanding of what the timeline is going to look like as it relates to award of business. The next point I had on here is risk analysis. So I really want everybody on the call, if you're going out there and you're proposing, sending a proposal to a supplier, really being aware of what's out there about your company. That includes finding out your Dun & Bradstreet status, finding out what's really online about your company, and kind of what the good and the bad. It's kind of like why I always say it's always better to get ahead of it, right? So if you can go and you can tell me that there's issues or things that you're working on as a company that I'm going to find negatively online, it's going to be better than me actually going out and finding it on the back end, where I'm going to have to potentially eliminate you for finding something that wasn't disclosed to me. So really find out what's online about your company, find out what your status is out there as a supplier, and be forthright with it. Sometimes these things can be just a quick conversation, but again, finding it on the back end, it can be a real determinant to you being successful in your bid. One other place I think there's a lot of heartache for both supplier and customer is the legal contract that's going to be used. So it's not a bad question to ask upfront when in the RFP process, what MSA or what contract will be used when the award is made. And it's not even a bad, if it's not included in the RFP, it's not a bad idea to ask for that legal template upfront, so you can start to take a look at what the MSA actually looks like that you're going to be required to sign if you're successful in winning the award. That really kind of comes down to, one, if it's on your paper, fantastic. It makes it a little bit easier for yourself. But I know here at Lantheus and previous companies that I've worked for, it's usually on it's on my paper. And again, you having visibility to some of those legal documents and requirements that are going to be made of you when signing up for new business can really expedite the back end of getting you on board significantly quicker. If there's no MSA, going to Andrea's point earlier, I really would encourage you to go out and visit the website of the supplier that you're working with. You're going to usually be able to find copies of PO terms, which again, you're going to have more than likely you'll get a PO from a supplier when you're awarded the business, and you'll be able to understand what those terms look like, what those payment terms, again, going back to my earlier point, what those payment terms look like. You're going to have to understand what the supplier code of conduct is, as well as probably signing off on that. So it's really good to get ahead of that as well as other key supplier onboarding points that you'll likely have to comply with. So really go out there, visit the website, play around with whatever it is out there on that website that they have, and ask questions about it. So again, understanding that you're likely going to have to comply with many, many different things that the company's asking for, being proactive and looking out there as it relates to what's on their website and what they're listing and sharing with the public is a benefit to you. Finally, I think that the one of the biggest things, the questions that's not often asked is maybe you're approached by a stakeholder within the company around a need that they have. Getting to the ultimate decision maker and understanding who the decision makers are in the process is key for you. You don't want to be in a situation where you're providing quotes and proposals to the end stakeholder that's using it, only to then be met with a barrage of procurement professionals or lawyers that you end up having to deal with to solidify the deal. So when you're approached by whether it be a stakeholder or a procurement professional, anybody within an organization, I think it's always a relevant question to ask, who is the ultimate decision maker and how long is it going to take for that decision to be made? And then finally, who's on the panel making the decision? Is it just the sole person, or is there a requirement for other folks to be involved? Here at Lantheus, we have a procurement policy that dictates specifically at certain levels of spend who needs to be involved. So say, for example, it's over $50,000 and under $100,000, there's actually a different level of scrutiny that it goes under that if it was spend under $50,000. So asking those questions up front is going to be able to position you better to really realistically not waste your time. If you're asking these questions and kind of understanding that there's a more diligent process coming, then you're going to be prepared in regards to timeline and expectations as it relates to you getting into the company. Finally, I would always advocate for protecting yourself, putting NDAs in place. Whenever you have the opportunity to respond to an RFP or talk with a new business partner, 9 times out of 10, a strong procurement professional will always ask to put an NDA in place. If they don't, there's nothing wrong with you asking that question. Protect yourself, protect your business, and ensure that those types of things are in place. So hopefully you took something from all those points. I know that was a lot all at once, but again, it's relatively rudimentary for me. But again, hopefully there was a point there that you did take that maybe you can now use in your RFP responses and your questions back to potential customers.
That was really helpful. Thank you, Declan. Just a quick question. Are you guys implementing some of the similar CSR things with suppliers that Smith & Nephew and Andrea was talking about? Or is that in the future, or is that current?
Yeah, so we are. So we're absolutely going through that, different types of ESG implementations as it relates to the types of suppliers that we're bringing on. Obviously, looking into our supplier diversity, ensuring that we have a very diverse supplier base. One point I didn't talk about on here as well is, when you are replying to customers, ensure that if you're a diverse supplier, you're mentioning that, right? That goes a long way. So yeah, certainly we're implementing those types of things. I would say we're a little bit more in the infancy stage, and bringing up to speed with it. But I think that's the wave of the future. That's never going to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Is your constellation of suppliers a little bit smaller because of the specialized nature of the business? I mean, do you feel like many, you're dealing with some pretty complex types of materials there? I mean, I assume that the industry that they're in, I mean, they have maybe a even higher level of scrutiny than.
Yeah, absolutely. So our certainly not, we're not Smith & Nephew. We don't have that many suppliers. Our supplier base is, like you said, Brian, significantly smaller than that. And reason being, again, is going back to the specialized nature of our products. Realistically, there's only a few number of suppliers that can supply the raw materials that we need to make our product. So that leads to a smaller supply base, just centered around the nature of the product that we're delivering.
So I know that getting in touch with folks like yourself is tough, especially for some suppliers. I mean, is there any tips you have for a good way to actually get your email or call answered, or is there a bad way to make sure they don't?
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's not as easy as going out and pinging someone on LinkedIn. Sometimes it is that easy, right? But I think for me,
my experience.
Yeah. So for me, I would say a lot of the times when the need arises is when I'm looking, and it's having the network or having calls like these and having expanding your network as it relates to procurement professionals. This is a great forum to do it, right? 9 times out of 10, if I get an email from a cold call or an email from a person I don't know, unless I have an immediate need, I kind of just throw it in the bank and forget about it until it's needed. But never send introductory emails, networking forums like this. I think are fantastic to get introduced to decision makers and procurement folks that are running these processes.
Yeah. Well, Declan, we're at time, so I really appreciate the chance to talk to you, and I think our audience appreciated it as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all our guests today. I thank Declan, Andrea, Eric for a fascinating conversation at this supplier showcase. We have recorded this program that will be available on demand to everyone who registered, and we'll also be promoting it on many of our social channels. This MassMEDIC Supplier Showcase is supported by Thermo Fisher Scientific and QAD. They're our series sponsors, and thank you to SteriPack for being our sponsor for today, and for Weedman, as well as being a sponsor of the program. On behalf of MassMEDIC, myself, and our guests, I want to wish you all a wonderful day, and we will see you again soon at another forum. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.